We are critical of this gay philosophy and gay way of life.
As police begin to enforce new laws that criminalize same-sex marriage.
There's a horrendous new phenomenon known as corrective rape.
She's a lesbian attacked for being un-African.
Of course, they are disgusting.
It's un-African, it's unethical, it's ungodly.
When sexual orientation came for the first time, it really shook the system.
C'est un virus nouveau qui date depuis quelques années pour diviser les Africains.
We understand, you think this is vile, you think this is un-African, unholy, good. But we are human. Can you stop killing us? Can you stop torturing us? Can you stop raping us? Can you stop forcing us out of our homes, out of our jobs, out of our communities, and out of our churches? Can you stop?
Silence about your issues is just like death to life. And I can't afford to die by not speaking. I would rather speak.
Today, the South African Department of Justice and the South African Human Rights Commission host the first regional conference aimed at finding practical solutions to end violence based on sexual orientation and gender identity and expression in Africa.
At last count, I counted about 75 countries that criminalizes consensual sexual acts between adults of the same sex.
This is the first regional conference of its kind, where civil society, human rights institutions, and sexual rights activists gather with government representatives from across the continent to discuss ways to implement Resolution 275, an anti-violence resolution adopted by the African Commission in 2014.
It's 10 years of hard work, 10 years of tears, blood, and sweat have come together to this moment.
Everyone has got a role, right? So even the charter itself sets out areas of cooperation between the AU and the African Commission.
We are in Sali, in Senegal, and this is the second meeting of the Casra Collective.
The immediate reason why we are here is to think together, to strategize, to build consensus about how we move forward, because we need to defend the gains that we've made at the Commission.
Casra is made up of the Coalition of African Lesbians, CAL, Heartland Alliance, African Men for Sexual Health and Rights, AMSHeR, and the Initiative for Strategic Litigation in Africa, ISLA.
I mean, the idea around Casra began as an initiative of a number of organizations working on sexual orientation, gender identity, and sexual rights issues generally in Africa, and working primarily at the African Commission on Human and People's Rights.
Our work is like a pressure group. Yeah, pressuring governments and whoever needs to be pressured. We had identified quite clearly the various phases of activism. So the first phase was quite deliberate, that we wanted to ensure that there was visibility. It's like we are told, there's no such thing as like, what is the Coalition of African Lesbians? You can't be African and a lesbian. And we are saying, actually, here we are, so visibility, both in terms of the name of CAL, but also working together with Casra, having organizations like AMSHeR and ISLA, and saying, we are here, we are African, and we are here now, and it is our time to claim our rights.
I think where Casra would come in is in those spaces where we need to advance the politics to another level.
April of 2014, a landmark resolution on violence based on sexual orientation and gender identity was passed by the Commission, and it was widely lauded and celebrated, and was the work of years of Casra members working together.
There is a lot to do, but as I said earlier, we need to see what we can do as Casra and the limitations that we have.
It's also about thinking, how do we respond strategically to the threats
against the African Commission itself.
The Executive Council of the African Union, when it met last earlier this year, basically instructed the African Commission to withdraw the observer status that had been granted to CAL.
That's why we have to do it like it's politically much stronger if we do it as Casra rather than as individual organizations.
Okay, so this is one that we all involved actively in, right?
This is what SALI is about. It is on our way to the African Commission. And so it just made sense to meet here a few days before the African Commission session is about to begin.
The African Commission for Human and People's Rights was established by the African Union in 1987.
African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which is the organ of the African Union, which is tasked with the responsibility of promoting and protecting human rights. It is set in terms of Article 30 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So their main business or mandate is to promote human rights.
It was proper for us to have an instrument that promotes and protects human rights on the continent, and to establish a body that will also monitor, protect, and promote human rights. The instrument is unique in that it recognizes African traditional values. We'll talk about that, I think, during our conversation. But what is also unique about the African Charter on Human and People's Rights is that it entrenches individual rights, collective rights, and most importantly, it also provides for duties.
The mandate of the African Commission is structured in such a way that they have the power and the authority to influence member states. So if you do that, then the force would come from the top to say, this is what you need to do at country level.
There are 2 sessions of the Commission each year, held in Banjul and any other member state. The headquarters of the African Commission are in Banjul, the capital city of the Islamic Republic of the Gambia, situated in the west coast of Africa and led by President Yahya Jammeh.
The heads of states are the ones who decide on the headquarters of each organ. They decided many years ago, for historical reasons, that the African Commission will be based in Banjul because the charter was adopted in Banjul. That's why it's called the Banjul Charter.
Gambia was selected because it was a peaceful country. But then there was a coup d'etat. And since then, there's definitely fear of speaking up, of freedom of expression is restricted.
The reality is that in Gambia, the president is well known for his penchant to violate human rights.
Those who accuse me of human rights violations.
Jammeh says all sorts of things at all different times, and some of the things he says he's going to do, he does. Before the commission, he would say something about all these people coming to the Gambia to spread homosexuality, how he was going to behead them, and all sorts of things.
There will be no compromise on racists, drug dealers, homosexuals, pedophiles, rapists. These are not going to be tolerated in this country.
It's just such an irony. You'd think that kind of a state would be, very careful, to be making those kind of statements.
It was in this climate when, in 2006, a number of regional and international sexual rights organizations started to attend the sessions in Banjul.
One of the most difficult things about working at the Commission was fear.
When sexual orientation came for the first time, it really shook the system.
The African Commission has been a hostile space.
I participated once, and I found it very homophobic.
We had huge of attacks from human rights organizations. There was this problematic organization from Nigeria. I hope they're not going to the African Commission anymore. Hey, they tortured us, those guys. Calling us all kinds of names that you know, we are beasts, we are animals, even dogs don't fuck like we do. We don't belong to Africa, this is not African.
It's un-African, it's unethical, it's ungodly.
When you say un-African, whose thought is that?
Respect African societies and their values.
Who defines African values? What are African values? Is it the AU that has the mandate to define what African values are?
Africans have never been homosexual. We have never seen homosexual frogs. I have cattle, I've never seen homosexual gay cattle. And homosexuality is detrimental to human existence.
I never knew what they were doing. That's how I've been told recently that what they do is terrible, disgusting.
For us, we're not even using religion and whatever to make and shape arguments. We are saying we are Africans. Some of the best thinkers globally that have contributed to global consciousness are Africans, and we want to think for ourselves. And so when you say un-African, whose thought is that?
At the heart of African values, Ubuntu as we call it, is respect for human dignity. That's what makes us as African people.
Let me also make it very clear. Even if the whole world accepts it, Jammeh will not accept it in the Gambia. Let them go and tell me whatever they want to tell. Do I care? I don't.
Due to the wide criminalization of consensual same-sex activity between adults in Africa, even further, the denial of the existence of these communities, therefore the denial of access to services by these communities all through the continent, has motivated a number of advocates around the continent who work on these issues in their countries to come together to raise an African voice.
Positioning ourselves as members of civil society, as people who were there to learn, as people who had an agenda around a specific set of rights for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people, yes, but also as people who wanted to be part of a broader human rights discussion on the continent.
Sincerely, their intention involved in terms of being involved in those spaces is advancing social justice and human rights. So for us, this is an important space, not necessarily because what happens there is going to be implemented, but it's a space for ideas. And where ideas are being debated, we have to be there. And we went in with that kind of thinking.
The African Commission on Human and People's Rights has 2 ordinary sessions every year. The 2 ordinary sessions are the spaces in which civil society is actually allowed to interact as a voice.
2006, we were in, I think in DRC, when we met Fikile.
We have a space called the NGO Forum, the African Commission, which we organize with human rights organizations. Some of the commissioners attend this space.
The first step was to convince the NGO Forum that this is an issue of concern at the continent. This was not obvious, this was not easy.
What would happen is that even the human rights organizations are calling us names, in the space when we are talking, and some of them would literally walk out. And that space is a very powerful space in a sense that the resolutions that are passed by the African Commission at the end of the session come from that space. They're formulated there. They're working groups. So we would not be able to participate in those working groups because we are not part of the agenda.
Every time we try to make an effort to be on the agenda, civil society groups, human rights defenders did not want to hear anything about it.
They thought it was a distraction. There were all sorts of other human rights violations. Why were people focusing on this? Why was such a lot of money spent on this? People are dying from conflict and all sorts of things. So this kind of oppression Olympics, who is a worthy victim and who's not.
They seem to think that we were
imposing on a space that we didn't belong to. And so there was open hostility, and nobody wanted to hear about how people were impacted, how people's lives were violated on a daily basis.
We started to form alliances with some of the, some of the friendly human rights organizations. One of the instrumental organizations that bought into our story was HURISA. But also Colette as a person, she was sitting in the committee of the NGO forum. So she was able from inside to navigate the space. So you needed those kinds of voices. It was not an easy relationship. There are some areas where we do not agree, even in terms of strategy, because people like Colette, for example, They do soft diplomacy.
Fikile was not very sure about this NGO forum, how it should be received. So she was busy doing her own mobilization, engagement, and engaging people and talking about it.
There's no point for us getting people into the room who are going to say that you cannot do this, you cannot do that, or the commission is going to be so angry.
We fought. We had to make the space ungovernable.
Actually, there was a picket that was organized by Carl, Paul was also there. There were quite a number of them.
It almost got physical in the space, honestly. It was rough. You know, Jewel, I'm talking about myself, Jewel Nana, Kasha, Jacqueline Kasha, Victor Mukasa. You know, I'm just counting the radical heads in the room who are like, we don't care, we are going to do this. So we did this sitting thing and we closed our mouth as a symbol of being silenced in the space, and we stood. And Colette freaked out.
They will have their own separate meeting, closed door there. They have group of people. When we do resolutions, we just see people appearing. That was not proper.
When we were adopting our resolutions, they already had one. But then, because it was something new, you had some kind of chaotic atmosphere.
We started, running parallel meeting. Okay, you have your meeting, you don't want us to talk in the meeting, then we can run our parallel meeting.
Maybe then for them it was proper maybe to understand how the system operates, but to separate themselves, to exclude themselves, they are the ones who created that.
And I said, Nana, at the next session, I'm going to give you a whole day, the first day. So you come and share with us what these issues are, because it seems there is a fear, people don't know what it's about. And before we can advocate for it, we need to know what it's about.
The NGO forum agreed to give space for people to begin the conversation. So this was billed as the beginning of the conversation.
The following session, he came with his team, a large group of people that he sponsored, and they went to town.
They had to listen to us, they had to put us on the program. And that's basically how it happened. And since that moment, we have been in the NGO forum program.
Having been able to create a voice and be visible in policy fora such as the African Union and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, that has been AMSHER's greatest achievement so far.
And that's where the sides event, in fact, came from. It has been institutionalized from a kind of robber attitude. If you came here with a serious agenda, you need a space that allows for deep conversation.
Sort of like to touch on relevant issues for the work that we are doing, whether it's offering introduction to sort of newcomers, see how the system works, or on specific issues of interest of different NGOs around litigation.
That's why we started with the side events.
In 2008, the Coalition of African Lesbians, a regional feminist organization representing numerous organizations across the continent, applied for observer status at the Commission.
So the African Commission became our organizing space. It became It became a political issue, and we deliberately said we wanted an application as the Coalition of African Lesbians.
CAL is a women's rights organization. We believe in social justice for all, and we see the oppression of women, and we hate it. And we're here to fight and to resist it. We are resistors, we are activists.
The membership here, CAL, was predominantly Southern Africa, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola, Botswana, and we had in East Africa, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Burundi. And then we also had in West Africa, Ghana, Nigeria in particular, and Sierra Leone.
CAL works with women living with HIV and AIDS, sex workers, you know, a list of women. And a lot of it is around sexual rights. A lot of it is about autonomy. It's about owning who we are and an embodiment of our sexuality.
We're not lawyers. Some of us are at CAL, but we don't go around looking for lawyers. We want and we look for people who are passionate activists. ISLA was a partner, do the litigation, and so we let them lead and we sort of see how we can support them and them us.
ISLA is a very, 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 very new organization, so we only had our offices from the beginning of this year. But I worked for an organization known as the International Center for the Protection of Human Rights, InterRights, which was based in London. And it was through that work that we began supporting the advocacy at the African Commission.
When the application for CAL came through, I thought it was just a straightforward application, particularly if one takes into consideration the criteria for granting observer status. The application stated that the organization protects and promotes the rights in the Charter, including the right to equality, the right to non-discrimination, the right to protection, equal protection of the law. So I must say that I moved the application quite naively. And I was quite shocked by the reaction that followed.
I think the first thing is women's sexuality often terrifies people. We should not have a sexuality. It's men who have sexuality, and we are the objects of men's sexuality. How dare you even think that you can be have observer status? How can this be a human rights issue? It's you and someone once called it, you women and your exotic pleasures. That was part of that reaction. It was a knee-jerk reaction.
It took 2 years for the commission to come back with a response. At every session, the response was, we're deferring the response because we're still discussing amongst ourselves.
There were times when CAL was advised by well-meaning people that you could actually get observer status if you removed the word lesbians.
Take out the lesbian, Maybe become the coalition of African women, ladies, something that's not lesbian. The likelihood of being granted observer status would be higher.
And at that time, it was important for CAL to say that we are actually lesbians. We are not going to call ourselves because this was a political decision, and we wanted the African Commission to recognize CAL as CAL is or as CAL was constituted.
Can you imagine losing the politics of who we are to change our name to get observer status? So there was no conversation there, It ended right there.
We wrote a letter and said, this has been going on for X number of years. We've heard that the documents are lost, it's been postponed. Now we want to know what is the status of our application. And then we got that decline.
When the application for observer status was rejected, the letter was in 3 to 4 sentences. Your application was rejected on the grounds that it does not promote the rights that are enshrined in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights.
There was a lot of generosity and goodwill from other civil society who came on board. No less than 21 organizations used their public statements to actually say something to the African Commission about their failure to give CAL the observer status.
I remember there was a huge mobilization among the civil society organizations working at this space, saying this is not acceptable.
Efforts were made by Center for Human Rights, URISA, and the collective of the NGO Forum. Every NGO showed so much solidarity that every statement, there was a paragraph, there were some sentences about CAL.
Eventually, if you think about that 2010 meeting, October 2010, the NGO Forum put the Commission under tremendous pressure.
For example, the fact that references to sexual and reproductive health and rights, individuals this right or regardless of their sexual orientation and gender identity.
I remember at some point the commissioner said, can you just, not add anything else on CAL, because we've heard that 20 organizations already has, talked about. We've heard, can you just make your statement not allude to that? But, it was a strategy, If someone don't want to listen to you, you talk until the person tells you that, I've heard what you want to, the point that you want to make.
So the questions then were, what do we do now? What's the next level of our advocacy? We came up with the idea of developing this resolution.
The United Nations had just passed a resolution on sexual orientation and gender identity.
So Resolution 1719 at the Human Rights Council was the first resolution at the UN that focuses on sexual orientation and gender identity. And it did the main theme was ending violence, an amazing political moment.
One of the resolutions of that process was that regions have to host seminars to engage their own regions, but also their countries.
We all know that that wasn't going to happen in Africa.
Africa does not host the region, the seminar. So we're putting pressure on Africa. All the other regions have held their seminars except us to talk about violences that are occurring on the basis of sexuality and gender in our continent.
Casra, in association with other organizations, started working on a resolution to end violence against people based on sexual orientation and gender identity and expression in Africa.
Thinking about Resolution 275 was very tactical in that violence would be the key to getting a resolution passed.
We wanted to get to a stage where people say, I don't like this, but I think violence is wrong.
So the first resolution that was proposed by CAL, supported by POA, I think I read out this resolution in Swaziland in the NGO Forum around violence against lesbians and violence against women. And there was a resounding rejection from the NGO Forum of that point. And it became clear, obviously, to LGBT activists that there's a lot of work that needs to get done.
It's all good and well that we know what sexuality means. It's all good and well that we understand some of the intersectionalities around sexual gender identity and sexual expressions. But we take it for granted that, from a human perspective, you think everybody does. But it's only when you start having those one-on-one conversations that you realize that there's a knowledge gap. And it's from that knowledge gap that certain decisions were made uninformed. That has been AMSHER's goal, to bring information to those that did not have it.
AMSHER, it's a coalition of MSM, which is men who have sex with men, and LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender-led organizations across Africa. And AMSHER was formed as a response to the silence and the denial around the realities of the lives of LGBT persons in Africa and the challenges and discriminations they faced.
We started writing shadow reports and giving those anecdotal information on the different countries. There's been shadow reports on Cameroon, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Burundi, Kenya, Uganda, and a few others. But that information was very, very important for commissioners to realize the gravity of the problem.
Nigeria has banned gay marriage and same-sex amorous relationships and prescribed penalties of up to 14 years in prison for those breaking the law.
Dozens of gay men are reported to have been arrested across Nigeria as police begin to enforce new laws that criminalize.
A lot of persons have been advised in Nigeria precisely to mind how they express themselves.
I was perceived to be gay by one pastor in my church. I don't get to be on the front mic anymore.
I didn't know how to reconcile my faith according to the biblical principles with the way I used to feel about other girls my age. I was existing in a society that found such things very unacceptable.
For Burundi, my country, we have a criminalizing law on grounds of homosexuality.
C'était difficile dans ma famille parce qu'on ne comprenait pas mon comportement parce qu'on savait que je suis lesbienne. Une vie est vraiment difficile.
Nous voulons faire paraître notre... Nous voulons faire savoir au public et au gouvernement camerounais que nous existons et que nous avons aussi des droits comme des autres, comme la population générale.
I was sent home because of homosexuality in school. I was caught red-handed with a pole of mine, and my uncle was taking care of me. He disowned me.
They have beaten me up. They have even raped me. I have been thrown out of where I live. It's hard for me sometimes because nobody can even understand me.
And as far as sexuality and being transgender in Zimbabwe, it's difficult, as you can well imagine, simply because the gay issue is just not acceptable politically.
The violations of human rights in this country, the cases of arrests, the cases of assault, the cases of harassment is mostly directed to the trans.
I mean, being intersex, or being lesbian, or gay, or asexual, or transgendered is not a big deal. Being persecuted for it is.
46-year-old David Katwachisule was a gay rights activist and resided in Mukono. His life was suddenly cut short yesterday afternoon when he was attacked at his home by unknown assailants. He was hit with a hammer on the head and died on the way to hospital.
Yudi Similani was walking home after a night out with friends when she was attacked by a group of men. They dragged her across the open ground to here. Then they stabbed her repeatedly. They gang-raped her, and they dumped her in this ditch.
The international human rights community condemns the murder of Sierra Leone lesbian activist Fanny Ann Eddy. 30-year-old Eddy was found raped and murdered in her office on Wednesday night.
They kill me picking and stab and brutal. Stab her here. Chest. But I will die. I am me. Make the day. Don't come again. Where I see me picking the dog.
I applaud organizations who continue fighting in that space. But for me personally, I don't quite link it to the everyday realities. The cruelty continues and continues, you know. I'm just tired of talking.
Silence about your issues is just like death to life. and I can't afford to die by not speaking. I would rather speak, even when it is dangerous. You just have to do it, because that's what you are born to do.
One of the critical things that happened was that document that we produced on violence. CAL and AMSHeR together pulled with our members, we pulled all this information on exactly what violence looks like on this continent based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression.
It is from that report that the resolution, had a better chance of being passed.
We managed to get friendly commissioners who recognized sexuality as a human rights issue, as well as sexual orientation and gender identity and expression, to participate at the launch, to speak at the launch. And we had the launch of this book at the African Commission in the session before. And I think that carried a lot of weight.
Once we felt we had the right numbers of commissioners from the various formal and informal interactions we had, then we presented it to the NGO forum.
During that session, NGOs were somehow felt the threat, the hostile environment that we were getting, and some were warned not to speak because they will anger the government. So those tactics were already coming in, and then the commission then was really forced to show its independence.
And at the session in Angola in 2014, in March, the resolution passed.
And we're like, boom, what in the world happened? It was so exciting, my word. I don't know how I felt.
I said, eventually they came to a resolution.
The shock of it actually paralyzes you for a minute. You're not sure how you're going to react. You just stop, you freeze. And then as it settles and it sinks in and it's real.
It's 10 years of hard work, 10 years of tears, blood, and sweat have come together to this moment.
The resolution is a resolution of the African Commission. The resolution has been passed by a human rights body, Pan-African human rights body, which is there for all Africans, regardless who you are, where you are from, who you love, what are your preferences, and how do you look like. It's there. It's our law. It's our resolution. It's the resolution for actually the world, not even only the Africans.
I could die and sleep in peace because of that resolution. It's not the end in itself, but for it to have happened on the African continent, I think that it's something that is worth recognizing after all the years of fighting.
Resolution 275 was adopted in April 2015 at the 55th session of the African Commission. Inspired by this success, the Coalition of African Lesbians and Partners decided to reapply for observer status.
After the resolution was adopted, we would see how CAL would apply because they've already included languages. So how is CAL going to get observer status? What other things can we use to build up to CAL reapplying and resubmitting an application?
I was asked to draft a legal opinion, setting out, the various provisions in the charter. We looked at the rules of procedure of the commission. We looked at, what options CAL has in terms of dealing with the rejection. And I advised that they should resubmit their application.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'm presenting the application of the Coalition of African Lesbians.
We're in that room. We've been told, yes, it's going to pass. We've been told, yes, it's been passed. On the other side, it's still a bit tricky. We're not sure what's going on.
CAL meets the charter objectives, and this application also for observer status by CAL fulfills the criteria established by the African Commission for granting observer status to non-governmental organizations. Our chair, the Secretariat recommends, and I support that we do accordingly accord observer status as an NGO to CAL. Thank you.
CAL's observer status had already been granted in a private session and only needed to be adopted.
Back to you, Chair. The Chair then says, this is outside of the normal procedure of what happens at the African Commission, right? Because once the person reading says we have granted, the Chair says, yes, adopted, yeah, oh, you know, we all clap, it's done. The Chair then says, does anyone else here amongst the commissioners have anything to say?
At that time, I think there were about 5 or 6 organizations that had been granted observer status, including CAL. But some commissioners saw it fit to open up the debate during the public session and reconsider in public the application.
L'État a l'obligation d'assister la famille dans sa mission de gardienne de la morale et des valeurs traditionnelles reconnues par la communauté.
For it to be then be reread and then referenced as not aligning, especially in a public gallery, was then I realized that trouble is brewing.
This matter has remained very divisive, not only in Africa, but in Europe and in the Americas. And because of that, no common position has been agreed upon internationally.
And then this public debate just broke out.
Si c'était en Afrique du Sud seulement, on n'aurait pas de problème, les Sud-Africains ont accepté. Mais si ça doit aller au-delà de l'Afrique du Sud, là, ça pose problème.
Well, the problem is that CAL's operations are not confined to the South African borders. So for them, they felt by granting them observer status, it would open them to actually go on a continent-wide recruitment process.
D'organiser un lobbying pour défendre l'intérêt national? Non, pour défendre les lesbiennes.
I was like, oh my God, like, we've just been granted observer status. Is it going? Is it going here and now? Like now? Like this? Is this it?
C'est une décision unanime. Nous avons respecté la loi. Nous avons respecté la position la plus importante, la plus forte au sein de notre commission. Il n'est pas saignant, il n'est pas bien que nous venions nous mettre en spectacle ici. J'ai dit, Madame la Présidente.
As you can hear the tone that's being set.
Il est importé. C'est un virus nouveau qui date depuis quelques années pour diviser les Africains, pour les détourner des vrais problèmes qui s'opposent à eux.
Commissioner Pence stood up and said, but this language is problematic, and I'm calling you, Vice Chair, to order.
To the Deputy Chair of this commission, I heard him use the word virus. So the word use of the word virus. These are words that were used, and we know that use words like this, like cockroach and so on, were used in Rwanda and led to genocide.
I think we could have handled the whole matter better than we did. Really, that was my frustration. And I just did not like the fact that our divisions were playing themselves out in public.
Et le secrétariat a dit oui. L'enregistrement a été fait en Afrique du Sud. Les objectifs, ce n'est pas une organisation qui va aller au Mali ou au Maghreb ou à... Non.
Commissioner Maiga, Commissioner Gansu, Commissioner Mute now started speaking about this space is created to protect human rights.
In the end, it's about the life of a person. It's about the life of a woman. It's about that woman who is forced to undergo corrective rape, because that was the case. They say, we shall rape you so that you change your orientation. It is about that. So this discussion must not be about us. This discussion must be about those people. It must be about those vulnerable people.
If this matter is going to divide the commission, we would rather hold it for the time being, and we deliberate further on it. I shall submit. Thank you.
Commissioner Pansy says no. Commissioner Rain says no. We are not differing. We've had this conversation. We have granted this organization observer status.
3 of the commissioners also threatening to walk out, on the basis that there has been a resolution that has been adopted by the commission, and they do not understand why they would want to then postpone.
If we can't find each other, we try to find each other, we have failed, we simply put a matter to vote. And I think we should put this matter to vote so that once and for all we deal with it. And that is
the 11 commissioners, 2 of the commissioners weren't present. We were hoping that it would stay that way. So the vote is called. Those who are for CAL's observer status. 5 commissioners put their cards up. Okay. Those who are against, 3 commissioners put their hands up, including 1 commissioner who had already voted yes, who's now taken back her vote because apparently she was cornered and was forced to change her position. But there's a commissioner who hasn't put up his card for his vote. So the chair, who is trying to influence this individual, says, but you're not voting. And you can see on her face, she's like, you're not voting because you should be voting now and your vote should be no.
Abstention.
Okay.
And because the other 2 commissioners aren't there who were in the red, that's how CAL got its vote.
Coalition africaine des lesbiennes est observée le statut de sénateur.
We do.
So the granting of observer status speaks to 2 fundamental rights that I can say are guaranteed in the African Charter. The right to freedom of expression, and I think the granting of that status has done that to us. We can express the right to freedom of assembly. We can assemble at the commission in our own voice, and it brings our dignity to be. When you speak in your own voice, how powerful it is. You can say, I am saying this. I am being killed. I am being murdered. I want you to hear.
Happiness in April 2015, extreme sadness in June 2015 when the AU, the Executive Council, issued a decision requesting the African Commission to withdraw CAL's observer status.
The African Union's Executive Council sent a request to the African Commission to withdraw CAL's observer status.
It was disappointing. It made me very angry. It didn't make sense.
We did anticipate the backlash, I think. I think in activism, it's foolish not to expect it. But when it came, it was still vicious. It still felt painful.
The big question will be what is going to happen to the observer status of the Coalition of African Lesbians.
Any number of things could happen. I think more importantly is what we are hoping will not happen, which is that the Commission actually takes a decision to withdraw CAL's observer status.
What the Executive Council did is actually quite huge, not only for CAL, but for everyone who really believes in strengthening our African human rights systems.
Any space that is used to challenge states, be it at the African Commission, we even feel it in our own countries, states, nations, whatever. Whenever we speak against our countries, whenever we go against what is considered the status quo, what happens? People disappear, organizations get shut down, they get raided, people get arrested. We know this. We have seen it. It's not just about this one organization, CAL.
We leave in a day and we all go off to the session in Banjul, the African Commission.
This would be the next session at which the Commission will very likely decide how it proceeds with that directive of the Executive Council.
The journey to the African Commission it's spiritual. It's deeply spiritual. You have to get yourself into a zone.
That trip alone, just starting from you getting your visa at the embassy at local level, is hectic.
Between South Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, Senegal, Ghana, Brussels, to get you to the Gambia 2 days later. Or you go to Senegal, you drive from the airport to the Gambia, and then you get a ferry too.
Well, it's a long trip. And sometimes it's stressful because some immigration officers will ask you some questions that can make your life just.
We had the Casra meeting in Senegal to plan for activities for this session of the Commission, but also for future planning. And our colleagues, Barry and Sbongile, were at this meeting, but also there was a death of another colleague, Joel Nana from Cameroon. So it was strategic to travel from Dakar to Cameroon to attend his funeral, which happened on Saturday.
I'm not good at saying words when somebody has died, but I will try anyway.
Joel was such an amazing person, and we all have amazing things to say. And
he came to the forum, he rocked the forum. There was resistance, but together we were able to break that resistance. Who would have said that the Commission would come up with such a resolution? Who?
Joel was a Pan-African and international personality. He also came from the Central African region and has worked very closely with us and was a dear friend to so many of us.
I'm feeling good. Let's run this session. I mean, we have a discussion on the independence of the African Commission with regard to what happened with the decision of the Executive Council. So the upcoming session is going to look at the relationship between the AU political bodies and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights.
We will now continue with the last panel that we have on today's agenda. And the panel will speak about preserving the African Commission independence and fulfilling its mandate, revisiting the relationships between the African Commission and the AU political organs. Will be chaired by Barry, and I welcome also the other panelists, Stefano and Wendy. Please, the floor is yours.
The Executive Council has contradicted the independence of the Commission and has somehow requested the Commission to review or to overturn its decision. And this is something that is increasingly happening, and I think that should worry the different actors that work with the African Commission on Human and People's Rights.
I don't think it's understatement to actually summarize it as probably the biggest threat to the very existence of the African Commission, not just its independence, but probably to its existence.
This threat is real. If the Commission does not withdraw CAL's observer status, what does that mean for the Commission? Yes, there's independence, we get that. But what will be the fate of the Commission? Because the Commission is also being threatened. So will it get shut down? Will it not receive funding? Because they receive a lot of their funding from the AU.
Calling for the independence of an institution could very easily end it up in the Siberia of AU institutions, where it receives neither funding nor support, and human rights issues do not get considered at political levels. And so I think we need to be careful and nuanced about how we go about our work.
So if CAL's observer status is under threat, and that's challenging the Executive Council of the African Union is not the way to go, because we'll antagonize governments and they could overreact and do all sorts of things. What are you suggesting that CAL must do?
This is not so much about creating space and assuring the space that is entitled to organizations engaging in LGBT advocacy. This is about all of us. The AU Assembly can shut down the African Commission if it wants.
You would shut down an entire commission because a tiny organization like CAL has observer status.
The commission decided that, look, instead of just withdrawing that, we have to look at the legal implication of the withdrawal on the functioning of the commission, issues of independence of the commission in its decision making. We have rules of procedure that provides for the granting of observer status, but there is nothing that talks about withdrawal. So we thought that we should look at all those issues.
Just for information, the Organization Coalition of African Lesbians, in collaboration with the Center for Human Rights, have today submitted the request for advisory opinion to the African Court on Human and People's Rights to get an interpretation of the word "what consider" mean. Does it mean that the Executive Council can overturn or can change substantive decision taken by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights in fulfilling its mandate?
The decision of the court will have a major implication, positively or negatively, on the mandate of the Commission.
Everyone is waiting to see what the African Commission will do. The advocacy has gone from critical mass to a critical few who continue to attend the Commission to defend against that have been made. In the meantime, the South African Department of Justice and the South African Human Rights Commission hosted a historic regional seminar.
We are having the first seminar, and the topic of the seminar is finding practical solutions to ending violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity and expression in Africa. I mean, come on. Here we are, here we are, here we are. And if we stay true to our messaging, that this is the start of a process, then we're on our way.
It's a beginning of a conversation, and it's not an easy conversation. And I completely understand why other countries would not be the first ones to jump and say, let me host it. And so what we are encouraged by, it's still this goodwill towards the meeting, and that there are people who are willing to say, I'll be there.
I mean, the original basis of this seminar was Resolution 1790. And we all know that that wasn't going to happen in Africa. Resolution 275 gave us a fallback option, a very viable fallback option to discuss the same issues we would have discussed with Resolution 1790. And so I think it is important for that reason, that it's a homegrown, fully owned by NGOs in Africa.
Bonjour, good morning. I'm hoping that we find this time as exciting time for us as Africans. And I really want to start by that round of applause to everyone who have put this together.
I'm very excited with this seminar. It's been a long way to come because sometimes we talk about violence, we talk about discrimination, but we never come together as an entity and various actors to actually find solutions.
Ladies and gentlemen, this seminar represents an unprecedented opportunity for the continent. By bringing together stakeholders from governments, national human rights institutions, international and regional bodies, civil societies and the academic communities, this will offer a platform for the engagement that I hope will be the first of many to come. We must speak out because lives are at stake and because it is our duty under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to protect the rights of everyone, everywhere. And with these few words, I declare the seminar open. Thank you.
It is an exciting moment. We feel that it's a beginning of a journey to have African governments, whether they agree or disagree, coming together and thinking about ways to agree and disagree or whatever. But the fact is they are here together.
People are entitled to their opinion. They are free to disapprove of same-sex relationships, for example. The balance between the tradition and culture on the one hand and universal human rights on the other must be struck in favor of human rights. Well, reality is that at a political level, there's still a lot of resistance in Africa because at a societal level, there's still a lot of resistance, and politics mirror society.
At last count, I counted about 75 countries that criminalizes consensual sexual acts between adults of the same sex. I would like, in the short time frame that I have, to just go back to the very charter that they are talking about. Every individual shall have the duty to respect and consider his fellow beings without discrimination and to maintain relations aimed at promoting, safeguarding, and reinforcing mutual respect and tolerance. That is our charter.
We must endeavor to understand the subject. Unless we human rights defenders understand it fully and grasp it, we will not be in a position to defend it ably.
I live in Kenya where there are these kind of, we call them lesbian sex panics, where suddenly there's this rumor that all the girls in a boarding school are sleeping with each other and they all get kicked out or suspended.
A lot of other constitutions, including the Namibian one, does not have a specific provision on sexual orientation, and that has often been used to not directly, as it were, provide for rights of LGBTI communities.
On the continent, we know that very few lawyers actually who are willing to take on these cases. Courts can ratify, but they do not necessarily lead social change. And that requires the state to take extra measures, not only to protect people from violence, but also to protect people from discrimination that leads to violence.
We have made strong pronouncements as a commission against violence and discrimination against persons of different sexual orientation. We have also called on the police to make sure that when they do get reports from persons relating to these issues, that they investigate and prosecute and ensure that they are not discriminated against.
Now, I'll be interested to hear from the panelists and other commissions here what they are doing practically. I think this meeting is about practical solutions. And I worry that we're spending too much time on theories and things in the books rather than things that are actually happening at institutional level. What are we doing to hold politicians accountable? Because I think once commissions start holding politicians and political parties accountable for inciting violence and hate speech, it will go a long way to reducing violence in our countries.
If I speak specifically for Tanzania, in the beginning, on the issue of AIDS, we shut our eyes and we isolated ourselves. And then slowly the issue grew bigger and bigger. And eventually we became open about it and solutions are being made. Personally, I do not see the need for us to rush it. Otherwise, they will not understand. If we're too speedy, the society will not understand and we will not move forward.
We don't need you to be followers of the ideas of our ancestors and the society that is slow or not ready. We need you to lead and set the standards. That's what you are for. We're not asking communities to say we love what you're doing. We believe in what you are doing. We are saying, keep your beliefs. We understand everybody has belief systems. We understand you think this is vile, you think this is un-African, unholy. Good. But we are human. Can you stop killing us? Can you stop torturing us? Can you stop raping us? Can you stop forcing us out of our homes, out of our jobs, out of our communities, and out of our churches? Can you stop? And that must be an okay thing to say. That must be okay.
The subject we are talking about is controversial. Sometimes we make statements without fully understanding it. So coming here, to me, was adding on to what I already knew, because I also happen to head the Human Rights Commission in my country. So these are matters I deal with, but now I see it from an African perspective.
Us here, we are all here. We have come here to learn. And I'm telling you that we are going to take necessary steps to make sure that we are going to work on everything that has been discussed here. Thank you.
Consciousness comes often from a question, and a question that makes discomfort, because comfort is the enemy of change. Once we're comfortable, then why do we need to change? So I have to believe, it's part of your question about hope, I have to believe that some of the questions and some of the things that have been said must be sparking something. And that's something I hope is discomfort.
When we have events like this, when people have sat down and deliberated over a number of issues, bringing the realities of context together, it's always a beautiful thing for them to leave the space saying, this one thing we commit to.
We are hoping that we will have produced a declaration which will be in writing commitment to this theme, which is ending violence and discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. And it will be something that all of us can leave this space with, that will be able to hold us accountable to, but also be able to do further advocacy around.
The name of the declaration is really based on the name of the seminar. We urged our governments to take leadership of the protection of the rights of people affected by violence and discrimination based on sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. We call on the regional economic commissions, the African Union, the United Nations, civil society organizations, communities, and relevant stakeholders to deepen engagement on bodily integrity and autonomy for all people. And finally, we called on countries and governments to take all necessary steps, measures to fully implement this declaration in close collaboration and partnership with the above-mentioned partners, the end. They are now trying to adopt the declaration. It will be an in-principle adoption because we still have to make some amendments to the text. But it all came together in the end, so we are quite happy. And Resolution 275 has a life, and all thanks to the African Commission, really.
It's amazing. Whatever our concerns, it's just amazing to see words put to the ideas and the experiences and the analysis, like to see it up there in like clear words, succinct, and just the power of it. It's amazing. This is good.
The declaration
although it's in draft, it's something that we can take forward, work on it, and we, from an organization point of view, can implement these things on ground level.
It is a beginning, but it looks like it's a beginning of something that is definitely going to be a lot more inspiring and a lot more in-depth in terms of the way that we're looking at doing policy work around making 275 real.
There's a sense of accomplishment. There's a sense of relief. And there's also a sense of nervousness. Simply because it has taken so long and so many people. And we've lost a couple of soldiers along the way in getting to this point. Speedy.
Yes, nose.
So tell me, where do you want me to insist?
Okay, alrighty.
Swangile main interview, happiness is.
A 4-letter word.
So how's your day so far?
Yo, I want to sleep.
It's a question about who is going to deliver the statement before the commission. We've decided that it probably will not be helpful or not strategic to have me do it as Wendy Isaac, because I'm clearly very visibly non-heterosexual, and
There's Carl changing their name to African ladies.
Man, call it to the people. Exactly.
Sound like you're an artist.
But I've laughed a full sentence, I'm sure.
I got you, dear.
No, this was off camera.
Do that again, please.
Oh, no, really?